Go
Well, I
ahead.
want to welcome everybody to our First Church in Belmont Alliance program, which we hold on the second Thursday of every month. I'm Kathy Lind, and I'm going to be introducing, I won't do too much of an introduction to Will Brownsberger. And as they say on NPR, our own Will Brownsberger, who is very involved in our church. As you know, he's been first our state rep and now our state senator. And he's going to be talking about what led him to becoming who he is today and what has drawn him to public service. And while I still have all your attention, I want to say that our next meeting will be on May the 14th, which is a Thursday. And as of yet, we don't have an official program planned. So what we had thought we would do would be to use that time for those of us who would like to join in to have a discussion about what would you like to see the Alliance do in the upcoming year? We have already 3 programs scheduled, but what kind of interest do you have? What do you think this time could be? Do you have any recommendations of what you would like to see? So that will be we'll have that on Thursday, May the 14th, and then we'll have a short board meeting, which we have to do every year as part of our official one. And then there will not be a June meeting. Okay. So I'm going to turn the program over to Will Brownsberger. Will, we're so pleased that you were able to give us this time in your busy schedule, and I will let you take it on from here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for all you do to bring the community together and talk about important issues. And I am just always grateful to be part of the UU community. It's such a wonderful and supportive community, and just so many wonderful people that I get to know through the church. And so I'm really just glad to be with you today and share a few thoughts. Nicole asked me to do this. It must have been the better part of a year ago. And I was at a point where I somehow kind of knew that I would have a campaign this year, and I do have a campaign. I do have a challenger this year, so I'm very focused on that. But I was preparing myself in a lot of ways for that possibility. Getting my data together and my finances together, and also sort of getting my thoughts together on how I'd evolved through a lot of issues. I have now been in politics for, starting from in Belmont politics. I think my first run at elected office was in 1996 when I did not get elected to town meeting. But so I suppose I've been in elected politics now for 30 years, which is kind of amazing to me. Over that time, I've had the opportunity to grow as a person and to grow through a whole lot of issues, and actually to be part of the evolution of consciousness generally on issues where, I think we've all evolved on a lot of issues over the past years that I've been paying attention. But I could talk for an hour or two on any of many issues that we've had the opportunity to evolve together on. But I just thought I'll just start by talking a little bit about my own sort of trajectory in service, and then be delighted to go where the group wants to go in terms of any particular issues or how my trajectory has worked for me. I came from a family that was oriented to service. Which is, it's a particular orientation. That, some families are oriented to making money, or some families are oriented to some kind of professional success. But I think it's fair to say that my family was oriented to service. My father's parents were missionaries, actually. They were medical missionaries in India. They were Seventh-day Adventists. And my father kind of broke from his parents on that issue, on the religion issue, but he very much followed them into service as a physician. I think he expected me to be a physician when I was about 30 and I'd already been to law school. He said to me, one of those things your dad says out of the blue, he says, gee, I don't know, Will, I guess if you don't become a doctor after all, you probably turn out okay somehow. But he was, and I was already so far well along in my career that he said that. But that was his kind of service, and I saw him continue that service even after he retired. It really till his last days he was going out and trying to take care of people one way or another. Took care of his friends, of course, took care of my mother in her last days. So they're very much an orientation to service. My mother was oriented to service as well. Her form of service, her chosen form of service was through translation. She kind of fell into becoming a really high level Russian translator. She translated Russian literature, and that was a form of service to bring out the voices of the emigre authors who were challenging the dominant Russian regime, and at that time, the Soviet, late communism, and bring their voices to the West. And I think she thought of it as a form of service, really, to them and to the people they were speaking for. So that's the orientation that I brought into my life. And when I came out of college, I really didn't know what to do, and I skipped some of the early steps there, but I I ended up going to law school, and when I came out of law school, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do because I was very much oriented to service, but that could take a lot of different forms. And my dad, interestingly enough, at that point, I think was wanted to see me financially stable, which of course parents always want for their kids. And so he pushed me not to go into public service, which was my immediate impulse. I was thinking about going to the Middlesex DA's office. I had a job offer from the Middlesex DA's office, when I finished law school, but he pushed me to take a job on Wall Street, and I did that. So I did spend 7 or 8 years on Wall Street, and I paid my student loans, and I paid for the first house, and so that was I did accomplish some necessary financial things, but I really was oriented to service. When I first went down there, I was in municipal finance, which was, I sort of thought that might be a way to combine service, working with municipalities, trying to do public projects, combine service with doing well financially. But there's a phrase in that business which is sort of, do you get the joke? And the joke is that you're performing public service, that you're trying to help municipalities. Well, the truth is that your goal is to do a deal, any deal, and if you can get a municipality to do a bond issue through you, you're going to pick up a very substantial number of golden crumbs in that process, and any deal that you do is a good deal for the bank. So I actually didn't stay in that very long. I moved over and felt better actually providing internal services in the bank. I was at Morgan Stanley, and then I was at Goldman Sachs, and I did systems development, and worked with my math major. But at a certain time, I did decide to make a move. I was traveling too much, and we had 2 young kids. And by the way, my wife Carolyn was on the call, and so at that point we had a 1-year-old and a 4-year-old, and it was just like, I'm 3 weeks away in Europe, and it's like, this is not right. And so I made a move to come back to Massachusetts and do what I originally wanted to do, which was go into the criminal justice process. I went to the Attorney General's office, and right away I sort of knew that it was a good move for me because I really did the job in the Attorney General's office, which was a great place there under Scott Harshbarger. We're now in like 1992. Was a place where his orientation was, we're here to do the right thing. We're here to do the right thing. We there are certain public priorities that we're trying to accomplish. Certain, he identified those. Health, there were public priorities that the Attorney General could advance. But in every case, the goal was to do justice, to do the right thing. It wasn't just to win; it was to do the right thing. So you filed a case, and if the right thing to do was to settle it or even dismiss it because you were wrong in the first place, well, that was the right thing to do. So it being in a job where it was my job to do the right thing, to think through what the right thing was ethically and morally and based on the facts of law of the case. I was very happy to be there. I was fortunate to, at that time, also get involved in a conversation about substance abuse issues at Harvard. Um, I had sort of a liberal view of drug policy. I couldn't understand what all the shooting was about, in the violence of the crack epidemic of the late 80s. And I sort of thought there must be a better way. And that brought me into a conversation, an interdisciplinary conversation at Harvard that was ongoing. And for about 10 years, I participated in that and became a chair of their working group on this and had on substance abuse in the criminal justice system, and had a couple other gigs teaching, consulting, research during that period. But at a certain point, I got this sort of nagging sense that, I didn't really understand addiction. I didn't understand what people who were involved with drugs, meaning the most serious drugs, cocaine and heroin, were up against. And I decided I wanted to stop talking about people with addictions and start talking with people with addictions. And so I was able to do that. I started doing defense work in a drug court in Brighton and then Dorchester. And two things happened at that time. One is I found out I loved standing next to people in trouble and winning their trust, which was very challenging to do a lot of the time, because you're talking about people sort of at their worst moment, and you're kind of part of the system. They don't realize, okay, you're there to help them, but to help them realize that, and to then make sure that they get a fair shake was very rewarding work. I had my father's background as a psychiatrist, and I kind of made a specialty out of representing the people that were really the most difficult to represent. After I've been doing a couple of years, the people who assigned cases, for bar advocacy, sort of identified me as the person that they would use when somebody had fired the last 3 or 4 lawyers. And I'd get involved and bring a case to conclusion that other people just hadn't been able to handle, because they hadn't been able to make a connection with the client and win their trust and be able to move forward together. So I loved that work, but it also very quickly changed my understanding of how the criminal justice system related to the process of recovery. That people trying to use the coercive power of the criminal justice system to cure addiction is like doing brain surgery with a sledgehammer. You say to somebody, well, I'll tell you what, if you could just stay clean, we'll let you live in the street, and we won't lock you up. But if you do test dirty, we're going to lock you up for a few days. And the consequences of that are incredibly destructive. Somebody has a slip in their recovery, and they end up getting locked up for a week, and when they lose their job, and then they lose their job, they lose their apartment, and they lose their apartment, they kind of probably break up with their girlfriend, and and they're busted back to the streets, and it's not a good way to go. So I've kind of moved away from the idea that treatment should partner with the criminal justice system to an idea that both treatment and criminal justice are important and necessary, but they probably are separate until somebody's actually locked up. So that experience influenced my thinking, and it's an important part of my background as a legislature. But backing up, through all of that, I was again becoming involved in local politics. Our kids were in the Belmont schools, which at that time were suffering from, they're still suffering from it, but at that time there was a lot of consciousness of how they were struggling financially, and our class sizes were too large and didn't have access to resources. And so Jean Mooney, who's on this call, and Priscilla Cobb, also a church member, and Monty Allen, also a church member, we and a couple other people started a conversation where just parents meeting in living rooms and having some public meetings and kind of agitating about the issue. We had a couple of public forums, and at one point, one of the school committee members, Jenny Fallon, came to us and said, if you people really want to do anything, one of you has to run for what was then called the Board of Selectmen, now called the Select Board. that, Gene and Priscilla and I, and we all talked about it a little bit, and that ended up being me. And so that's how I got into local politics in Belmont. And so that of course, it's so much bigger than you realize. I mean, we tend to sort of see so much coverage of the national news, and it's hard to know what's going on in local government. But when I got on the select board, and I quickly became not involved, I followed through on my commitment to to improving resources for education, and I know that I made a very substantial difference just at the negotiating table, working out additional resources for education. And I was closely partnered with the then superintendent Peter Holland, who was a great advocate for education. And so we worked together to make sure that education got a better slice of the pie. And we also did fought to put together the necessary overrides on the ballots a couple of times. I think we put no less than we won 6 override or debt exclusion questions in a row during my tenure. And then at a certain point, we did start to lose. And that's kind of how it is. You always have to ask yourself the question, if you're considering a tax increase, are we doing this for the most important thing? Because you never know when the taxpayers are going to start feeling that it's too much and start pushing back and voting no on increases. So you got to do the most important things first, and we try to do that. But after a few years, the state rep seat opened up, and I think people I've become chair, and we've gone through a lot of battles, and we kept the town together and moved forward on a lot of things. And people generally expected me to be the next state rep. It was not an internal fight. I did not have a primary fight for that job. I came to the legislature with a focus on solving the municipal problems, trying to bring more resources back to the community. I still have that focus. And that, of course, has been much of what I've done. I've been diligent about advocating for local aid. And I will say that local aid and education aid are pretty much sacrosanct priorities for most, if not all, legislators. And so I was not unique in advocating for local aid. And by and large, we've done pretty well on local aid, although you can always ask, could we do better? You do become aware of, I guess, and that was one of the things I was going to say as I just backing up to talk about the select board. When I got on the board, I of course became involved in a lot of other issues and recognized the importance of a lot of other issues on the town side, like the governance and integrity of our police force was an important issue that we had to fight some battles on. We had a huge development fight in McLean. We had the challenge of building a senior center, now the Beach Street Center, which I worked diligently on for a 10-year period before that was really done. So we got a lot done and things that I didn't anticipate. And it's the same when I got to the legislature. I had the focus on local aid, and over time, your focus broadens. I did have the criminal justice focus, and that's an important arc of what I worked on in the legislature. But when I got into the legislature, and after I'd been there about 6 months, lots of people had worked with me, and it was more than once that I got the question. It was like, "So Will, you've been there for 6 months now. So tell me what you've run into that you've found surprising." And I always had an easy answer to that question because it was really true. I was surprised to find out that I liked my colleagues. That actually, most of the people I worked with were there for the right reasons and pretty sharp and pretty personable. It's hard to get to the legislature if you're not sharp and personable. But in addition, they're mostly there for the right reasons. The legislature, I think it's very difficult to understand from outside why the legislature sometimes seems to move slowly. And there is a reason, which is that the legislature is a deliberative body. And by which I mean a body in which a large group of people come in with very different views and have to harmonize those views. And that takes time. So if you might, I think the comparison to a trial jury is a useful one. If you, I don't know how many have ever had the occasion to serve on a jury. But I did have the occasion myself. I was surprised. It was only just a year or two ago I got picked to serve on a serious criminal trial up in Middlesex Superior Court. So I was really glad to have that interior experience or inside experience of the process. But think about it. You take a dozen people and you tell them to go make a decision in a room. And so they might take weeks to make that decision. And then they come back with what? Just a word or just two words, guilty or not guilty. And you say, well, how could it take, 6 weeks for you to come up with two lousy words? And it's kind of the same way in the legislature. Sometimes it takes a while for us to talk through bills. And so that a process is one that's a little bit mysterious even to us here in the legislature. That's really hundreds or thousands of conversations happening across a whole lot of whole lot of places and channels, but we get to decisions, and so the legislature looks slow from the outside, but it's a deliberative process. And when you get inside, you find out that actually everybody here is most people are here for the right reasons, and most of it's pretty good. So I did, in my early days in the legislature, fight some battles with leadership around transparency issues. I was particularly concerned around financial transparency. And this was a time, if you recall, so I got to the legislature in 2007, 2008, which was around the time that Salvatore De Masi was speaker, and he was corrupt. He was, in fact, corrupt. He was funneling money to himself through a complicated arrangement. I really feel he betrayed his colleagues in that. He lied to us all. He was actually a very charming man, and he did some wonderful things. I mean, under his leadership, we protected equality of marriage. Under his leadership, we put in place our very progressive healthcare insurance system. We led the nation in that. Under his leadership, we passed the Global Warming Solutions Act, which is something I advocated heavily for, and also the Green Communities Act, which laid the foundation for basically mass save and all the other things that we're doing in the environmental space. So he did great work. At the same time, unfortunately, he, I guess, had lifestyle ambitions that were above his means, and he was corrupt, and he betrayed us all. And in that time, I was therefore especially concerned about how the legislature was spending its money. Being a bit of a nerd, I kind of did a sort of a little bit of a dive into that. I made a public records request to the Comptroller's office to understand how is the legislature spending not the money. I mean, we spend whatever it's now about $60 billion a year on behalf of all of the programs and all the things that the state government does, but we also spend a much smaller number, maybe like 60 million. That's the right number of zeros. I'm not sure what the right number is right now. But at that time, it was something like that on the internal operations of the legislature, which are, of course, mostly salary for staff, but also some expenditure on things like our facilities and our electronic communications and our website and so forth. So there's a bunch of contracts in there, and I got interested in that, and I made this public records request. I analyzed the data. I posted it on my website, and I set off a firestorm. I knew I was probably tipping my toe in dangerous waters, but it turned out there were some things that people didn't understand. There was a $300,000 legal bill, and it was like, are you paying the legal bills of Salvatore De Masi? And we couldn't get an answer on that. And the legislative leaders were slow to disclose that. It turned out that it was actually something basically legitimate. So when the U.S. attorney starts making requests for sending subpoenas, you have to have lawyers review what you give them back, even in the best of circumstances, and that's what that money was. But it set off a firestorm, and it kind of, the way leadership at that time responded undermined my confidence in the legislative leaders, and I had a vice chairmanship. I'd been doing, well. I was a productive member of the legislature, but I resigned from that as kind of a statement, and campaigned hard for additional transparency around our financial spending. are the details of how we were spending our money, and also around the procurement process. And the way I handled that was probably a little more fire than needed, because I might have gotten to the same place with a little more honey. But so that but being not understanding the process well enough, I did end up kind of setting myself on fire, and ended up being assigned to a fifth floor office with no windows, and sort of experiencing that traditional legislative kind of punishment. But it was a successful battle in that we, number one, did pass rules that opened up our procurement process to competitive bidding. And number two, we did put in place strong transparency legislation. So you can now see, anybody can go see how every last penny is spent of the state's money. It's on the website called See-Through. That's a capital CTHRU. And that's part of the controller's office, but we did mandate that at that time, and that's been a successful disclosure mechanism. So I felt good about that process, and I was very focused on transparency at that stage. And at that time, I had the opportunity to jump from the House to the Senate. That opened up, and I kind of died and went to heaven. It was much more. The Senate being a smaller body, it's basically the Senate needs everybody. You can't sort of get shunted into the Netherlands in the Senate. And I had the opportunity to kind of reset my relationship with legislative leaders, and I got drawn into a conversation about child sexual abuse, and which of course is a serious ongoing challenge through the ages. And the way I handled that, I think, got the attention of Terry Murray, who was the president, and she at that time, and she made me chair of the Judiciary Committee. So that put me in a wonderful place to pursue my interests and the experience and learning that I had from being in criminal justice. And then Stan Rosenberg became president, and Stan wanted to do something in the space of criminal justice reform. There was increasing consensus to do that. And he helped initiate a collaborative process involving the Council on State Governments, which is a nationwide organization. And Stan, so we brought together the governor, the Speaker of the House, the Senate President, and the Chief Justice of the Supreme Judicial Court. And each of them kind of appointed a second, and I was Stan's, and then there was other people who had primary involvement in the conversations from each of those other major branches. And so we had a lot of meetings, and we had a lot of conversations, and that shaped one package of reforms. And it's interesting, the one thing, the CSG, the Council on State Governments process, is always oriented, it's always supposed to be a consensus process. So everybody has to agree to it. And the thing that everybody can agree on, whether you're a conservative, fire and brimstone, crime and punishment person, or whether you're a bleeding heart liberal on corrections, the one thing everybody agrees on is if somebody's been incarcerated, we would like them to come back out in the community and be successful. So there's everywhere they go, the CSG process ends up finding out that the consensus space is on reentry. And so that was what that package focused on. But at the same time, there were a whole bunch of non-consensus reforms. I mean, a much larger collection of reforms pending. And I worked as chair of Judiciary to put together a second package. So we had two packages. We had the CSG package, and we had a much broader soup to nuts criminal justice reform package. And I was able, on the foundation of the relationships that we developed through the consultative process over the prior couple of years, to work together with the House and with the governor's office, with the support of the then Chief Justice, now deceased Ralph Gantz. He died early. Put together a huge reform package. And so that was a sort of a landmark thing, and broadly recognized as a landmark thing. People didn't think we'd ever be able to come to consensus on it, but we did. I mean, it was a negotiation at the end of the day, but we put together a huge progress. And then I was in a great position then when George Floyd happened in 2020, to follow that up with a very strong, and I do believe it is one of the best in the country's police accountability package. So over the years, and then the tragic thing happened actually, which was that Stan Rosenberg got in trouble. He had a relationship with a young man who was kind of a problem and caused a set of issues that happened in the Senate. And I was on the ethical committee that kind of reviewed that all. And at the end of it, Stan did resign, and Karen Spilka became president. And Karen and I had a relationship, and so when she became president, I sort of lucked into advancing to the level I'm now at, which is president pro tem of the Senate, which is means I run the Senate a fair amount of the time on the floor, and I also play a key role in a lot of the decisions we make. And so I'm really been lucky in a few different ways. I've worked hard as well, and I've benefited from all the support and wisdom of the great collection of constituents I have in Belmont and Watertown and in Boston. I'm at a place where I'm kind of at the top of my stride, and I'm thankful to be here. And so that's sort of a little bit longer trajectory explanation than I intended, but I hope it's been interesting, and I'd love to share thoughts on any questions that people have about how I got to where I am, or on anything at all. Actually, not any kind of there's a lot of public policy issues I've been involved with and have strong feelings about that we haven't talked about. So I'm delighted to talk about anything at all that folks would like to talk about at this stage.
Well, great. Well, that was wonderful, and I really enjoyed seeing how you just fleshed out all of that for us. And I want to thank you personally for your hard work in public service, and for your connection to the community, for the getting our input and then letting us know your thoughts about a whole range of things. And I do have some questions, and we can talk about that later. I wanted to ask a little bit about energy and electrical. I know you were working on some of that, but I will ask that later. Let's open it up. If anybody has something they'd like to ask, Will, could you unmute yourself? And then, Will, if you can see their names, you can call on them, or would you like me to do that, or what?
Yeah, I mean, we're a small enough group. People can more or less jump in, right?
Right, right.
I see Nicole's got her hand up. Why don't you jump in, Nicole?
Yeah, first of all, thank you very much for everything. I would like us to know a little bit more. I know you don't like to talk about yourself, but really, but
Nicole, I'm not sure I'm hearing you. Are you
uh,
Okay.
what you can you hear me now? My internet is not too good. Whether you know what you did with your house, you changed house, then you retrofitted it for energy, then you yourself are using a bicycle to go to work. I'd like us to know a little bit more about that.
Well, sure. I think like so many people, right? I got especially engaged in the climate change issue after Al Gore's, Inconvenient Truth movie. I mean, we all kind of dialed into it around that time. Or, I know there were people who had more foresight and were more engaged earlier, but that's, I was always somewhat interested in it, but I that's when I got serious. And so at that point, I did get serious and tried to be oriented to green transportation and riding my bicycle more. So there's always that two different levels. There's the public policy level and there's the personal level, and I felt good about it. It's something we all want to do that, right? We want to think we're part of the solution to the problem, and so we want to try to in our own lives model the right behavior and do the low carbon thing. And so I got oriented to green transportation, shifted to bicycling more. And of course, that indulged something which is I've always liked to do. I've always been a distance athlete, whether it's swimming, running, or biking. So biking more was something that I enjoyed doing personally. And so I made a thing out of that. And that, by the way, has been an important thing for me in the legislature. I mean, bike safety, pedestrian safety, public transportation, those are all things I've worked hard on through the years and continuing to focus on very much. But so there's that. And then there's there's the transportation side. I also eat fairly low on the carbon on the food chain. I went through a phase at that time of being completely vegan, couldn't sustain that. There was a hamburger once that I just sort of said, I got to have this. And it was sort of like, okay, I guess I'm done being vegan for now. That was about 4 years, but I still sort of lean that way because I think that's A, better for you, and B, respects animals, and C, is good for the environment. But the other thing I've spent a lot of time on is, and Carolyn and around 2009, as our kids went to school, went to college, and I was still working, making very limited, the income as an assistant attorney general, and then as doing bar advocacy work, which I was doing, was not consistent with sending kids to college, and so we did have the single family house. We downsized, reduced our mortgage and all that, and stabilized. And so what we did was we downsized into a 2-family with my parents, who were about at a stage where they were ready to downsize. They had a larger old house in Watertown. And so we downsized into that 2-family, and we made a decision to do a deep energy retrofit. And that was not an easy decision, because it turned out that increased the cost a lot of sort of renovating that house. The house needed a lot of work. But we kind of bit the bullet and decided that we could swing it, and we did. And this is 2009 when we bought that house, and that was an exciting time to try to do a real estate transaction. When the house we sold, the bottom was falling out of the real estate market, and we just kept cutting the price. We managed to sell our house finally, and then we bought that house. We kind of lucked into the availability of a 2-family that was appropriate, that had some good bones but needed some work. So we bought that, but that was at the very same time we had just passed the Global Warming Solutions Act, and which the Global Warming Solutions Act is one of those things that has an awfully pretentious name. Of course, we didn't have any solutions for global warming in this act, but what it did was, which was significant, was set some bigger, some climate goals, 20% by 2020, 80% by 2050. Those were the goals then, which had currency. Those were, by the way, goals which were, I think those goals were compromise goals that European governments were pushing at that time. The United States had declined by a near unanimous vote of the Senate. This is 99, maybe, or 97, had unanimously decided not to enter the Kyoto Protocol, which would have called on the United States to reduce its emissions while permitting developing countries to increase their emissions. Basically all of our senators, including John Kerry and then Ted Kennedy, voted against that and said, no, that's not a good deal for us. But European governments embraced it, and those goals, that 20% by 2020, was something that they were kind of talking about as a follow-on step to the Kyoto Protocol. Kyoto was like 10 years old by then, and that was sort of the thing that they were talking about. I don't think anything was actually formally adopted to that effect internationally, but that was an idea that Canada and other European countries were floating at that time. So we embraced that. We created an inventory of global warming gases emissions in Massachusetts. So that's what we did with that Global Warming Solutions Act. We set goals that were broadly consistent with international goals. And 2, we created the inventory systems to track how we were doing. And also in that same cycle, we did the Green Communities program and did some reforms that created the Mass Save program and a focus on residential decarbonization. So the project that we did at our house was one of the first projects to benefit from that new framework. And we did participate in the incentive program that National Grid was offering. You know, that was at a stage where they were desperately looking for people who are crazy enough to spend the money to do this work. I mean, we spent, round numbers, we probably spent $300,000 on the environmental dimensions of that project, of which they allowed us, they allowed us as what they considered to be the environmental dimensions, maybe 180,000, of which they paid about a third. So we did get a very substantial incentive, about 57,000 from National Grid. They did an evaluation study of that program after it had been going for a couple of years, and we were customer number one in that evaluation study. I mean, you can read the evaluation study. I recognize our numbers. So we were customer number one, and the basic conclusion of the study was we're not going to find enough people who are crazy enough to spend this amount of money. And it's also these incentives that we're giving people, to give one family $57,000 at the expense of other ratepayers is probably not something is sustainable, because it's just, you're going to do it for a very small number of people at the expense of everybody. And they pretty much abandoned the program then. The idea keeps coming back of funding deep energy retrofits. In our case, the deep energy retrofit is something we're basically glad we did. We have a house that's incredibly stable from a temperature-wise standpoint. If we have the windows closed and when we're not over ventilating the house will just not change in temperature very fast at all. I mean, it will get cold if we didn't have heat for a while. When we first did the project, we started with gas heat, and then we went to heat pumps a couple of years ago. We had a lot of problems with our initial heat pump installation. Our heat pump was out in January for a few days, not weeks. But our house didn't get cold. We were okay. We have two different heat pumps. One went out, and the upstairs unit went out. We were fine for a few days. And so it's very stable. It's very quiet. It can be as warm as we want it in this winter, and as cool as we want it in the summer. And so it's a nice thing, but it was expensive, and it's probably not a model. The whole deep energy retrofit thing is really a kind of a boutique product wherever it's been done across the world. I've seen, I don't think there's any place in the world where people are doing deep energy retrofits on a whole old housing stock at scale. It's always sort of a pilot program, and people who haven't really, advocates who haven't seen how it's performed, start over again and say, we need to do this for everybody. But while I'm glad we did it, I know that it's not a solution for everybody. But we're happy to live to be able to say that we have a fossil-free home, which we do. We have no gas connection, no oil. We're just entirely reliant on electric. And that's a nice thing to be able to say, and it's a nice feeling to have. And we don't worry about the indoor air pollution from gas stoves and that kind of stuff. So it's great. It's good, but there's a much larger conversation to be had about how we get to our carbon goals. No, look, you're so right, and there's so many people that have the same frustration and feeling that they don't see a way to maintain. And of course, we were able to find a solution by downsizing into a two-family with my parents, but we were kind of lucked into an option, but those options are rare. And in my own family, my middle daughter, was unable, once she broke up with her boyfriend, to keep her apartment in Fenway. She went through 3 different groups and roommate groups in Brighton that were difficult and financially not great, and so she gave up and moved home. And then she moved to Maine. Then she moved further out in Maine, so she now lives in Auburn, which is up there by Lewiston, about 45 minutes northwest of Portland. And now I think she's, and even there, it's tight for her. So it's a reality. Housing is expensive, and here's the thing: for what it's worth, it is cheaper in some places than it is in Massachusetts, but at the income scales that people have, it's pretty much a problem everywhere in the country right now. When I went up to I went to a conference in Toronto of Eastern states and Eastern Canadian provinces, and everybody's talking about housing. It's the top of the list everywhere. So I think that the situation we've gotten ourselves into with housing is one that took us 100 years to get into. We started planning and restricting the production of housing, limiting housing production to larger homes, and spacing it out and creating the leafy communities that we have. We started that about 100 years ago, the sort of urban planning movement, and we created all these suburbs. And we don't have the it's always interesting. Well, look at the video from the Ukraine, and you see all these tall apartment buildings. They're not as desirable to live in, but the housing at least is there. And we do have to have more dense housing across the state. And so that's a big focus of mine legislatively, is to remove barriers to increased density. And we did that with the MBTA Communities Act. We have more work to do on that. We know we have more work to do on that. It's a political challenge because people do push back. So that's one of those things that's going to move slower than we want it to, but that's definitely something I have my shoulder to. We also recognize that that is not a quick fix. And so we also are putting money into affordable housing spending to just drive further construction of housing that is more affordable, and also doing what we can to protect people who are in rental housing today already by trying to prevent abuses in the rental market. And we've eliminated the rental brokerage fees, which make it harder for people to move, and also doing substantially increased funding for programs like RAFT and MRVP and home base, which keep people in housing, from falling out of bed. I mean, from falling out of bed, they're stable housing. So that's just one of our central challenges, and all legislators have that at the top of their list right now. Well, I was in a meeting with the Senate President and a bunch of other leaders. This is I think now 2 years ago, 18 months ago, and she said, "Hey, so what's top of mind for everybody?" Everybody just went around the table: housing, 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 housing. The same answer all the way around the table, and it's the same up and down the eastern seaboard, and of course in the west, and even in a lot of central places. Housing costs are divergent from people's income. So it's a biggest challenge. I will say this, that it is one of other affordable challenges. So healthcare, of course, is almost as expensive, and for some people more expensive than housing. And that is one where, thanks to large federal assistance, we are covering the healthcare costs of not just the poorest people, but a lot of people. So the state covers health insurance for 2 million out of 7 million people. It's a very, very big program. We subsidize for another few 100,000. Of course, we also are focused on early education, which allows people to work and pay for housing, and free community college, so people come out without student loans and are better able to afford housing. And we subsidize public transportation to a huge degree. Most of the costs of public transportation are paid by the general taxpayers as opposed by the riders. So there's a lot we're doing to preserve the buzzword being affordability. And there were a lot we're doing to respond to that housing problem. But I know that it's a very, very real problem anyway, and the solutions can't come fast enough.
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah,
Yes.
cool. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Senator. I used to live in Belmont, actually, and I started following your email list when I lived there, and I now live in Arlington, but I still follow you, and I appreciate your work, even though you're not my immediate representative anymore. I was going to ask about housing, but since you just answered that, I would love to talk more about energy and the retrofit, as a segue from the retrofit you did. I'm wondering what you see as being on the roadmap for the state's climate legislation or initiatives. And you mentioned scale before. What can the state do at scale, considering especially the federal headwinds? And then sort of a secondary question is like, how does a person follow this stuff? Because I consider myself very interested in this, and I have all these like custom Google alerts, and I have a hard time following what's going on. Like when Vineyard Wind rolled out, like just tracking isn't even online was hard to do. The transmission through Maine, the line that went up, like is it up? I can't really even get a status, so it's hard to follow this stuff. So yeah, what can we do, and then how does someone follow it? Thank you.
Great question. So I would say a couple things. What is the most important thing for us to do? Number one, I think it is for us to focus on resiliency. Because the truth is that internationally, there is no framework right now. There is no climate framework. It is not only the case, not only has the United States repudiated international treaties, but those international treaties do not have teeth. So other developed countries are only doing so much, but even more importantly, the developing countries, to whom we have said, look, we understand that you need to develop, and we understand that that's going to result in increasing emissions. That has been the international position since the beginning of the climate conversation. Those developing countries now account for 75% of emissions. So China, India, Singapore, and 100 other 20 some nations, 100 to 150 other nations, account for 75% of the emissions. It is no longer the case that the United States and Europe account for most emissions. That was true when we started the process, and it's still true that we account for most of the historical emissions. So from a culpability standpoint, if you will, it's still us. But they're catching up fast because their trajectory, at least for the last 5 years, has continued to be upwards. There are some who are sort of hoping that maybe their trajectory is softening, and war in the Persian Gulf may reduce emissions globally. Although all the stuff they're burning right there in the Gulf, I don't know. But it's possible that could have a positive upside. But what I'm saying is this: there's no prospect that we're not going to have climate change now. It's happening. We all know it's happening. We all remember how things were when we were a kid. We know it's not the same anymore. And we also know that emissions are continuing. The volume of emissions are continuing. So as long as emissions continue, the ultimate equilibrium temperature is going to keep going up. So we better get ready. And there's important things to do. So for example, the place that I particularly focus is on the sea level rise. I mean, we live in basically a river delta. I mean, there's if you look at the topography of the Charles and the Mystic, there's kind of a triangle, kind of a drainage, delta that looks like, the Nile Delta or any other delta, that most of the value of Greater Boston is sitting right in that delta. Belmont, parts of Belmont are a bit above it. It's kind of at the edge, but, a lot of what I represent is right in that delta. And so the way we have to protect that is with, that delta is already protected by seawalls at the mouth of the Charles and at the mouth of the at the mouth of the Mystic, which keep the water out. So the water level in the Charles and the Mystic is at an artificially low level, and that's allowed us to create Back Bay and all of these, and all the development down around Fresh Pond and so forth. Those were swamps before, in the 19th century. It's really in the 20th century, early 20th century, and then, continuing through the 20th century, we've built these protections. We have to elevate those protections. So right in the environmental bond bill that's going to come out next week, or it has come out and we'll approve next week. I've earmarked $120 million for work at the mouth of the Mystic, and there's also work we need to do on the Charles side, which may need federal help for. So there's a whole set of things that we want to do in that space, and that's a high priority for me. So that's part one. We got to focus on resilience. Part two is we need to focus on continuing to improve our energy grid. Because if we're going to go to heat pumps, we're going to need, and we're going to go to electric vehicles, and we're going to use distributed solar. all of those things generate large flows of current into individual homes, in and out of individual homes, that our system was not built to handle. Our system was built to handle lights on in every house, and the occasional sort of burst of power for a power saw or an oven going or something, but it's not built to handle the huge, the much larger charging voltages, solar, backfeed, and the heavy loads and sustained loads from heat pumps if everybody has them. So that and by the way, even if in any scenario, we're going to need more capacity to support air conditioning as the summers get warmer. So that has to be a huge priority. And the improvement of the electrical grid, both sort of very locally on individual streets and also in the transmission level, is a really complicated process. And you say it's hard to follow. It is hard to follow. It's just hard to follow, full stop. And I try to follow it somewhat, but it's always daunting. You got to sort of clear your desk for a week to kind of catch up when you want to catch up, because there's just so many dimensions of it. It's so complicated, and the regulatory structure is complicated. It's mixed, state, federal, and then the independent service operator for New England, which regulates the bidding process for power suppliers. It's all very complicated. So it's not easy to follow. It's intrinsically complicated, but we do have good people in the administration who are focused on it. We do have a strong leader in the Senate, Senator Barrett, who's chair of our Utilities Committee rather, who is focused on it, and there's a lot of advocates who are focused on it. So you got to get your information from multiple places, and because some of it is opinionated, and some of it is industry driven, and so it's a seriously hard thing to follow. But that core priority, is something that we need to keep in front of us, and the energy bill that we have before us does that, I think. So we need to keep that in focus. The third thing I think that we need to focus on is technology improvement. I think part of the problem, the way I've sort of come to view our energy transition problem, is that the technology is only so-so. The heat pumps they work in our climate, but they don't work so well that they're incredibly compelling and everybody wants one. We still have to pay people to take them. And then when they take them, they don't necessarily use them. That's one of our problems when you look at the evaluation data, is not everybody really uses their heat pump for heating. It might be great for air conditioning, but it may not keep up in the winter the way they want it to. So we need to support continuing technology development, and of course we need to, and that includes also EV batteries getting better, and the EV charging process getting better, so we can all be really happy about driving an electric car. Just pull in, pump it full of energy in 3 minutes, and then keep going the way we can with the gas tank. And ultimately, I think we also have to hope for technology improvement in the electric power generation process. We'd love to have clean, safe nukes, which we don't really quite yet have. There's still a few years away, and maybe that few years might be 10 or 20 years. We'll see. But there's a ton of money going into batteries. There's a ton of money going into nuclear power. A lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of technology development, a lot of different models. So I'm hopeful that electrification will work out. I do believe it has so much to offer over burning fossil fuels. When we had in 2020, you heard the birds again. When everybody was staying home and nobody was driving, the air was better. And it would be wonderful if everybody was driving electric and nobody was, heating their home with fossil. We would feel it. It would be good for our health. And ultimately, I think the technology is going to get to the point where it's compelling from an economic standpoint and to sort of a convenience standpoint. So resilience, the grid, technology improvement. And of course, on the technology improvement, it's not something that happens just in Massachusetts, but we can try to make our contributions by supporting, energy innovation. I don't know if that's helpful, but that's how I see the big picture.
Thank you very much.
Well, I mentioned earlier my question, similar to Ben's, had to do with energy, and I know that Ed and I did switch to a whole house heat pump a number of years ago, and we are very happy with it. And maybe we wear more turtlenecks and fleeces than we used to, but it's really been great. But my question is, at that time, we were able to utilize some of the Mass Save rebates and some of the things the town of Belmont had that was incentives to help us.
Yeah.
And in terms of electric cars now are putting in a charger in your home. Are there incentives now for purchasing electric cars or installing home chargers as there were many years ago, either in the state or in the town that you're aware of?
So let's see. On the cars themselves, of course, we're losing the major federal subsidy. I do believe we still have a state subsidy. It's a smaller number. I think it's like 1,500 or 1,000 or something. I think that's still there. I can actually check on that for you. I'm making a note of that. I'd like to know myself what the status of that is. I think there's still assistance available through. We do have a charging subsidy program that it's one of the things that is in our energy bills. We're paying for providing that subsidy to others. But let me check on the exact numbers now. But of course, the biggest number was the federal, and that has gone away.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm going to get back to you on that, Kathy.
I'd appreciate it because I think more of us are beginning to think along those lines, and there's, the fact that I know there was nationally some money that was supposed to put in more chargers on the highways, and there's just some controversy about our administration at this point not going in that direction, and we're, so
Yeah,
it is
definitely.
an issue because it is the way we need to go to get off of fossil fuels. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. We definitely, thank you. No, we definitely want to get to that place.
Okay. Do other people have questions or comments to Will?
If I could just add a comment, I think the technology on this is changing so fast that if you installed a heat pump like 3 years ago versus the heat pump you could get today, there's a huge difference. And I don't even know, like the idea that you have to wear more turtlenecks, honestly, I don't even think is true if you do it today anymore, which is amazing. So this really is advancing fast.
Right. Thank you, Val.
I'm
Yeah,
saying
and
that
by the
from
way,
personal experience. We just did it ourselves, and we had a wonderful winter.
yeah, no, with our because our demand is so low because of our heat pump, we don't have a problem staying warm. Even in the coldest weather, we've not had a problem staying warm. The thing that's been frustrating for us is, and this is something that is now really has improved already, is the refrigerants in the heat pumps themselves are potent greenhouse gases. We've had a series of leaks. I'm sad to say that because of those leaks, our heat pump installations, definitely an environmental net negative at this point. But the heat pump, and so it's going to be probably going to remain an environmental net negative over the life of the project because of it's leaked repeatedly, and those are potent greenhouse gases. However, the new heat pumps have different refrigerants, which are still potent, but much less potent as greenhouse gases. And I hope, the labor force is getting better and better at understanding how to do these heat pumps right.
Yeah. And I will say that the reason for the more turtlenecks, Ben, is not a heat pump issue. It's because we're cheap. But the heat pump has been great.
That
Can
sounds
I
good.
ask a specific follow-up, by the way, about emissions? It does seem like one piece of potentially low-hanging fruit in Massachusetts is the number of gas leaks. Like you walk down the street and I might have a very sensitive nose, but I'm constantly smelling gas leaks. And there are public maps of this data. There are gas leaks everywhere. And I realize a lot of the time that involves ripping up the road, which is very expensive, but often it might not. And I haven't really seen the state do anything at scale on that problem.
Well, that's a really, really, really interesting question because we did in 2014, I think thereabouts, pass what's called the Gas System Enhancement Program, which is specifically designed to address exactly that, which is the gas companies have always been incredibly responsive to hazardous leaks. And what is a hazardous leak? A hazardous leak is a leak into an internal space. where the gas concentration will rise and be mixed with oxygen and be ready to explode. However, you could have just a geyser of gas emissions into the open atmosphere, and it's really not a hazard because the gas concentrations are basically not high enough to light, and certainly not to light in a way that would cause an explosion. So these super leaks that had huge environmental impacts were not being addressed. So we did pass legislation called the Gas System Enhancement Program in 2014. And now, and so a lot has been done. A lot of pipe has been replaced, but there's sort of been a flip in terms of how people feel about this. And so environmental advocates are pushing for us to stop that program because they feel that it is pushing additional investment into the gas system when we should be getting off of gas. And that's an incredibly difficult conversation. So, and what we have done is basically said you should look at repair as an option. I think that's it's hard to know. Repair versus replacements is always a really difficult call because also a lot of the time you don't really know where the leak is. I mean, it's coming out of the ground at a certain place, but the hole in the pipe might be 100 yards away from that, and so it's an incredibly challenging thing. And there is controversy about that right now. There's people who are really pushing us to stop the gas enhancement program, including some of the same people who originally advocated for it. But it's a sunsetted program anyway. I think it's sunsets in 2030, so it's just a question of whether we stop it earlier or not. But a lot of money is going into leak fixing, and it has survived so far as a program.
Well,
I was just going to say thank you. It seems like we're talked out, and we are a little past the hour. But like I said at the beginning, I'm grateful to be part of this community. I'm so grateful to be friends with so many people on this call already, and to just be able to hear from you, and keep the thoughts coming and the advice coming, because it's how I'm able to serve is through your support, and I thank you
for your dedication to public service, and you've shown us the complexities of all the stuff that's on your shoulders, and we feel honored to have you there. So thank you.